have about 57, 58, 58 people that are attending. And so I am going to start with, let me switch my screens here. I'm going to start with our official board agenda. And before I do that, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Faison, are we ready to go as it relates to, are we live? Everyone for being here.
Yes, we are live.
I know that right now we have about. Okay, thank you. It is 6:01. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, I'm going to ask you to conduct roll call. I know originally I did ask you to conduct a roll call for specifically for, the ad hoc committee. If you don't mind, just actually do a roll call for everyone, because I'm not able to fully go through and see who's on the call when, and that way we'll know who's here.
One minute, Dr. Gant. And I
Okay.
just want to make sure I don't omit anyone.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Davis. Mr. Stevens. Ms. Davis.
Here.
Dr. Yeager.
Here.
Dr. Dykeman.
Here.
Mr. Worthy. Dr. Gant.
Here. And I think I saw Mr. Worthy as well as Mr. Stevens on. I think Mr. Stevens is muted.
Okay. All right, Mr. Worthy, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Knox. And Dr. Maddox. Okay, Ms. Palmer, did you get that?
I did get that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for roll call for us. We are going to move forward with the motion. So just to be clear, this is sort of a committee meeting with the public. And so in a committee meeting, the committee actually votes. And so in this case, I'm going to open the floor for our committee. That'll be myself, Dr. Dykeman, and Ms. Davis to amend or adopt the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda as published.
Second.
Okay. All right. All of us in favor, the three of us, if we would simply say aye.
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 Okay. And I have noted that there are none opposed on the committee. Okay, so we are going to move forward with the order of the evening. I do want to, on item 1, I do want to welcome everyone. I know that we have a lot of individuals here tonight, which I think is great. I think this will be a welcome conversation that many have looked forward to, and I hope, I think all of us share. I know Mr. Sheets and Dr. Daniels and I have spoken a few times, and our goal is for this to begin some critical conversations, but also some constructive conversations around issues that we all care about. And so I do want to thank everyone, welcome everyone, as well as you've already heard the board members that are here, but I'll just restate for the record that the committee, the ad hoc committee, and includes myself, Ms. Davis, and Dr. Dykeman. And so specifically, I've asked the three of us, as well as Dr. Thomas and her staff, and Mr. Pruitt, Mr. Gaskins to reread our cognitive report, to also go back and look at policy that we think would be relevant to our discussion tonight, and as well as just preparing any student data that may be relevant as well. So again, thank you for being here. As you see, there's an order that's been laid out. We are, there are estimated times that I would encourage all of us, including myself, I may be at my 3-minute mark, to adhere to, so that we can be sure that we allow time for the topics at hand as well as the discussion. So thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Mosley with opening remarks.
Do you hear me? Hello? I'm Abraham Mosley, pastor of the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church for the last 47 years. It is my sincere hope that all of you are safe and well. I'm speaking to the Athens community and the Board of Education today to solicit your support and our ongoing advocacy for the children of Athens-Clarke County School District. As many of you know, the Board of Education recently settled with Dr. Mean, who was on administrative leave. His leaving is a loss for our children. Today, the Board of Education refused to provide anyone in the community the rationale and our cause for this action, in spite of being requested numerous times. The Athens-Clarke County African American community has demonstrated support for our children and the superintendent at Board of Education meeting continuously. The meeting tonight has been scheduled with the Board of Education representative with the anticipation of receiving response from our concern. As a community, we want to demonstrate to the Board of Education that for you to make sure that all of our children are cared for properly by the school district. We know that Dr. Mean was a strong advocate for all children, but in particular, the Black and brown children that make up 74% of the school district population, who are struggling academically behind the white children. It is our intent tonight to show the Board of Education that we stand with all educators that are willing to stand up for our children. Dr. Mean was willing to do this, and done so, he risked his career and subjected his family to undeserved pain. I'm asking that each of you put aside your individual agenda that are not in the best interest of all of our children. Plain and simple, the issue at hand is that we cannot allow you, the Board of Education, to eliminate and erase the existence of an advocate for our children with no explanation. Many of you are not aware that one of the board members called the NAACP and told him that we, as a Black community, did not support our superintendent. Hopefully, you will acknowledge that this was far from the truth after our meeting tonight. The community needs you to understand, as our representative, that we are here tonight to show support for all leaders making decisions that would benefit our children and teachers. The data clearly shows that Dr. Mean's plan was working. Children of color are woefully behind academically, and 3.4 times less than the white children. We also know that children of color are disproportionately suspended and expelled from our schools. Dr. Mean put back the alternative school that was aborted by Dr. Lanu. We need our students in a learning environment and not in the streets. Therefore, we expect the leadership who has been assigned this role to courageously continue the work that Dr. Mean started. The time has come for us to rise up as concerned groups of people and ensure that our voices are heard by you, the Board of Education. Finally, the future of our children hang in the balance with you as the representative for our school district. I'm asking that you put aside and do whatever it takes to convince the accreditation agency that change will be made in the best interest for all of our children. We need to remove this cloud of uncertainty regarding the status of Clark County School District accreditation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Mosley, for your opening remarks. Mr. Sheets, I have you at opening remarks as well. And we can't hear you, Mr. Sheets. You're on mute. Let's see.
Testing, check one, testing, check mic,
We can
check
hear
mic.
you. We can hear
All
you
right,
now.
great. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to back up just a little bit. I'd like to take a moment to introduce everyone from the panel of the NAACP and the clergy. You just heard from Pastor Abraham Mosley, pastor of the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. You'll also be hearing from Dr. Diane Dunstan, physician and board president of East Athens Development Corporation. Also, Dr. Frankie Hill, retired educator. Reverend Isaiah Ellison, pastor of Summer Hill Baptist Church and owner of Ellison's Professional Services. Sheila Neely Norman, retired educator, Clark County School District. Also, Mr. Ed Helm, retired attorney. And Mr. Fred Smith Sr., executive director, East Athens Development Corporation, and co-founder of Athens Area Black History Bowl. Also, Reverend Dr. Darrell Bloodsaw, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church West. We also like to say welcome to Athens, Clark County, Georgia. Dr. Maurice C. Daniels, Dean Emeritus, and Professor Emeritus, University of Georgia School of Social Work, and myself, Alvin Sheets, President for the local NAACP, Unit 5180, Athens, Clark County, as well as a few other hats in this community. I won't be long, folks, won't be as long as I was with that. I just thank everyone for taking time out of their schedule and finding out Robert to come and be involved in this dialogue as it relates to the future of our children. Our children are now at the mercy of all that has happened, and not to mention COVID. We have to get serious, folks, about the future of our children and the education.
Mr. Sheets has frozen on my end. Ms. Palmer, can other people hear Mr. Sheets?
No, he is frozen.
He is frozen.
Mr. Sheets, I don't know if you can hear us, but we can no longer hear you. If he's able to reconnect, we'll circle back around so that he can finish his remarks. But we'll move forward and turn the floor over right now to Dr. Maurice Daniels.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On behalf of the NAACP, the distinguished members of the clergy and other community stakeholders, we want to express our deepest thanks to the Clark County School Board for this opportunity to dialogue with you related to community concerns. We'd like to begin with a moment of silence for the victims of COVID-19. Our thoughts and prayers are with all those families in our community, our nation, and certainly around the globe who have been affected by this terrible plague. We also pause in this moment for George Floyd, for Ahmaud Arbery, for Breonna Taylor, Sequoia Turner, and so many other victims of injustice and man's inhumanity to man. Thank you very kindly. The NAACP has a long-standing history and an impeccable record in the struggle against social injustice in America. In the Athens community, the NAACP led the legal efforts for the desegregation of the University of Georgia and for the desegregation of the Clark County School District. Notwithstanding the phenomenal progress of the NAACP, there remains vestiges of racial oppression, which often manifests itself in racial and social disparities. Research shows that such disparities are quite alarming in the Clark County School District. While many of us embraced Dr. Means because of his overall leadership capacity, we especially embraced his fervent commitment to ensuring that Black and brown children have the opportunity to achieve at the same rate as their white counterparts, and that children from low-income families have the same opportunity to achieve as those students from middle and upper income families. Dr. Means' policies and actions during his short tenure in the Clark County School District embrace the very essence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we come this evening in part because we believe that the Board of Education actions have set our community back in terms of addressing some of the appalling disparities with regard to the education of Black and brown children. In the words of the great freedom fighter, Congressman John Lewis, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral imperative to say something and to do something. As eloquently articulated often by Dr. King, injustice anywhere is indeed a threat to justice everywhere. We also come this evening because of grave concerns related to the Cognia Special Review Report that resulted in the downgrading of the accreditation of the Clark County School District. We are specifically interested in knowing the board's progress in addressing the concerns that have been noted in the Cognia report and how the board plans to hold board members accountable. The Cognia report excoriates individual board members for violations of its own policies, for interfering with the day-to-day operations of the school district, and for a violation of the Open Meetings Act. The report also states that most board members do not adhere to the code of ethics. These concerns, as expressed by Cognia, are deeply troubling. So we are here in this moment in time because we contend that our board must deal positively and forthrightly with the crisis as it relates to the downgrading of its accreditation. Let me say as I close that there is a great deal of tension in our community surrounding our school board. In the midst of this tension, though we are deeply disappointed, we come this evening in a spirit of unity, we come in a spirit of love, and we come in a spirit of peace. We are mindful, however, as eloquently expressed by Dr. King, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. We look forward this evening to a constructive and productive dialogue to address some of the serious concerns facing our school district. The agenda for this evening's meeting will include brief presentations, questions, and dialogue with the board related to the Cognia report, the Clark County School Board's adherence to district policies and individual board members' accountability, an overview of the Clark County School District's accomplishments under the leadership of Dr. Damon Means, and questions regarding the board decision to place Dr. Damon Means on administrative leave and the separation agreement. Each presenter will have 3 minutes to make brief remarks and ask questions, which will be followed by 7 minutes for board response and discussion. We will now proceed with our panelists, beginning with Dr. Diane Dunstan. Thank you.
Before,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Dr. Daniels and Dr. Dunstan, I have made a note, Dr. Daniels, that we are going to start the timer at 10 minutes. I know we talked a little bit about 3 and then 7, but just logistically wanted to be sure that there were not too many interruptions between there.
Sure.
And so I just wanted to notify you of that change.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gant.
Sure. Turning the floor back over to Dr. Dunstan.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. Thank you, Dr. Daniels, and special thanks to the board for allowing us to address you this evening so that we can get clarity on the position of the Clark County School District as it relates to the district's accreditation being placed under review. I would like for the board to discuss with the community the insufficient rating in the Cognia Special Review Report under Leadership Capacity Standard number 1.5. This standard states, and I quote, "The governing authority adheres to a code of ethics and functions within defined roles and responsibilities." End of quote. The insufficient rating on standard 1.5 came as a result of the review team's finding of board members who have interfered in day-to-day operations of the Clark County School District. The review team also found that board members appear confused as to how to conduct meetings and unclear about key policies related to their decision-making. It was noted in the report that improvements in these areas is a priority, and directives were given to help the board in addressing the deficiencies in standard 1.5. The report addressed the fact that the Clark County School District Board Policy BH outlines the code of ethics and governing functions of the Clark County School District. Board of Education, board member conduct, board and community relations, conflicts of interest, and board meetings are among the many responsibilities addressed in policy BH. My questions to you. Part 1, has the board identified the board members who have acted outside of their governing authority, interfering in the day-to-day operations of the Clark County School District? And how will these board members be held accountable for their actions which have jeopardized the accreditation of the district? And part 2, what steps are being taken by the board to address the issues regarding the conducting of board meetings as well as board member understanding and adhering to the policies that relate to your decision-making responsibilities in governance of Clark County School District? You heard the question.
Dr. Dunstan, was that the end of your?
That's it.
Okay. I took a couple of notes, and so if the committee doesn't mind if I start, and certainly Dr. Dunstan, please let me know if I missed something, and team, please jump in because you may have some as well. The very first thing you mentioned about the standard 1.5, just generally that being, insufficient. And so on the rating with Cognia, insufficient is that the red. And so that is one that is more alarming. I will just share some of the things that we've been doing so far to address those areas. One is we have, if you take a look at the directives that are also listed under that area, two of those are critical and they lay the foundation, and that is to conduct, discuss, and document a board self-study prior to the start of 2021 school year, as well as create and document behavioral and or productivity objectives, strategies, actions, and evaluation measures based on the self-study. So in essence, the self-study really will be the core, is the foundation of how we assess ourselves, how we actually, based on that, how we receive professional development, based on those areas of weakness. And I will say that we began those conversations. We originally had our self-study scheduled for, we're in August, so July. And due to some recent events, I think you all know as well, we're glad to have Dr. Thomas back, but the self-study is something that all 10 of us have to do. And so we have since, we are in the process of rescheduling that, hopefully for the end of August. But that will hopefully give us another inside and outside look and support at those areas that we need to change, that we need to improve on. So that was one thing. And then I know you also mentioned if the board has identified those board members specifically as it relates to a violation of policy. The board has not had any official conversation, but I think it is accurate to say we are a fairly new board, and we also have some pretty experienced members. And at some point or another, there's so much of our policy, there's a portion of it that is straightforward, and then there are elements that are open to interpretation. But I think I can say confidently that as a board in general, no one wants to violate policies or go operate outside of our ethics. But to your question specifically, we have adopted a norm so far, and the norm is not our policy, but more so like best practices to be able to address issues when either a board member or a board officer, when there is a problem, or when that person is, we perceive that person is in violation of a policy. And it's a step-by-step process. I know that the 3 that we have worked on are, at some point, they have been on board docs, but there are many more that we hope to work on soon over the next 4 months to really fill in the gap where policy leaves off, where where I may interpret something one way, another person may interpret it another way, to get everyone on the same page. But I've talked for 4 minutes, so I want to Ms. Davis, Dr. Dykeman, and even Dr. Dunston certainly open the floor for follow-up dialogue.
So I want to, again, try to address that specific question relative to what has the board done to discipline itself and hold itself accountable. I thank you for the path forward that Dr. Gant has laid for us. And I think that we're all in agreement that going forward, those are things that we want to do. But our board meetings bear out the fact that we have called out specific board members for things that we thought were in violation. And our board has not had a mindset or a heart to actually follow through on that. And so we just don't see things the same way. I do see that we have an opportunity here to continue as we begin to work through our norms and recognize our norms. I believe that there is a lot of learning taking place. I think that a lot of self-reflection is taking place, but I have been encouraged by the fact that there is a persistence in saying we have to hold ourselves accountable, and that's a behavior that we need to do starting now. And so again, thank you for calling us out on that, and I do expect that the community will hold us accountable for doing exactly that.
I just wanted to speak to the last directive underneath that standard, which talks about whole board training sessions on the standards for effective governance of Georgia school systems. And so we did have a whole board training with Georgia School Board Association at the end of February to go over the standards for effective governance. That was a 2-day training. And then also, as Dr. Gant and also Ms. Davis mentioned about the norms development, that's something that we're all working on and then bringing to the full board to adopt as norms. And those I know Dr. Gant has also been in contact with GSBA regarding those norms to make sure that what we're doing and how we're working on norms is on the right track. So that's, the norms are ongoing and the training for the standards for effective governance has taken place already.
If I could interject, Dr. Gant?
Sure.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a follow-up question with regard to the self-study. How will the community and stakeholders be involved in the self-study process?
You know, that's a good question. The self-study in and of itself is conducted by board members, but they are, when we take the self-study, as well as the superintendent. It's the 10 of us. And when we actually take the self-study, we are looking at not if I necessarily and individually, if I engage in this manner, but if the whole board, like if we function as a unit, if this is an area of strength. And so the process does not include, it doesn't inherently include stakeholders outside of the board. But to your question, Dr. Daniels, there was one of our directives that I think may have fallen under one of the standards, and I just can't remember if it was under initiating or insufficient, where we actually, establishing a means to routinely gather stakeholder perception data. That's actually on page 5, so it's under the previous one. And so that is an area that the board we still have to discuss. But the self-assessment itself starts with and includes the board and the superintendent.
Okay, and just one follow-up. Do you plan, or does the board plan to identify those board members who the cognitive report mentions perhaps with regard to violations? And do you plan to hold those members accountable in some way?
Well, currently with the cognitive report, I know that, we all have different thoughts, as well as there's information out there as it relates to who the individual board members may be. But to this day, the board, I'm going to go back to something Ms. Davis said, we don't see everything the same, but I don't think it's a matter of the board having not discussed it. And so with opportunities to have discussions on whether a particular board member has violated policy to an extent that they warrant a hearing, I do think the board has done that. Now, the results may not have ended. We may not have all agreed, but as far as the majority of the board, taking a stance or saying we want to go farther or we don't, in the cases that have been brought up, I think that has occurred.
I wanted to say something regarding the letting the community know how the self-study is going or the results of the self-study. So we have filled out evaluations individually, but then there will be a meeting with GSBA for them to help us go through our self-study and help us to understand and talk about it. And I imagine that is a public meeting. Yes, Dr. Gant. So that is what Dr. Gant was saying we were supposed to have in July, but is being rescheduled to the end of August. But that is something that will be a public meeting as well.
I wanted to, can you hear me? Someone nod if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, I just, and not to belabor this point, but I do want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that adhering to policy and behaving unethically are not the same thing. And I don't want us to sugarcoat it in any way. This was an ethical violation, and so if we have people who are on the board who are acting unethically, that the adhering to policy is a whole different discussion from what we're talking about right here. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you for noting that. Yes, we have a, you're correct, embedded in our policy is a code of ethics. And so, but the code of ethics is, it's its own section. And so to your point, yeah, they are different. But you know, our code of ethics are certainly included in our policy, but they do look at different behaviors.
Dr. Gant, is the timer, how's our time for this question?
I think we're past it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think we will then move on into the next item on our agenda. Ms. Sheila Neela Norman is going to pose some questions.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
can hear you.
Okay. The report states that board members do not always adhere to policies they have established and adopted. I think Dr. Gant and Mrs. Davis have answered the question that board members have not actually been pointed out or identified who did not adhere to policies that you have established and adopted. But how will you hold these board members accountable? And what specific actions will the board take to prevent such violations of board policies in the future? Under standard number 1.4, Cotnia also found, and I quote, acts of the board raised questions about adherence to policy as well as following the Roberts Rules of Order in conducting business. This is a serious concern that the accrediting body found that the board is not adhering to policy as well as not following Roberts Rules of Order in conducting business. What steps has the board taken with regard to responding to this very serious concern? Perhaps one of the most serious findings in the Cotnia report, also under standard number 1.4, is a potential violation of policy BH, Code of Ethics, which states board members shall recognize that the authority of the board rests only with the board as a whole and not with individual board members. Has the board identified members with potential violations of Code of Ethics? How do you plan to hold these board members accountable? And what steps do you plan to implement to avoid future violations of the Code of Ethics?
Thank you, Ms. Norman. Is that the conclusion of your questions?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Dr. Dykeman or Ms. Davis, would you like to start, or are you okay with?
I'll be happy to try and start. And so the questions, as I understand it, I think I got this right. What steps has the board taken to what was that, to make sure that as we see these violations that we're calling that out? I think that the beginning had to be just training, first of all, and understanding our policies and knowing what those policies meant. And it is not an easy process, I can tell you that, to go through policy and have 4 people agree that it says the same thing or means the same thing. And it's certainly more difficult the more people we have. And that has been the surprising thing for me. I've been on the board since 2012. And every policy committee meeting that I sit in on, even when I was on the policy committee and chair and vice chair of the policy committee, it was challenging to get to a consensus of opinion. What I do see and take courage from is the fact that as we have reviewed our policies, and I say countless times, and that's very serious, as we have tried to create board norms around our behaviors to correct these behaviors so that we do have a channel and a process by which we address our discrepancies and our indiscretions, then the policies are getting a very strong vetting. So the next process, or we haven't finished all of the norms, but as we finish the norms are being posted. And then what I'm seeing happen already is different people are now saying, it's not just Mr. Worthy all the time having to say, you know, that's a violation of this. Different people are calling our attention to the fact that we may be stepping out of line or we may be crossing the line. And so that to me is the learning that needs to take place for all new board members. And I'll go back to something that Dr. Gant said earlier. This is a new board. They haven't been here a year. And I know from my own experience, it took years for me to get to a place that I was comfortable even thinking that I could quote policy. So I would chalk a lot of the failures that we've had to newness. But what I'm excited about now, and it's only recently, that we seem to have a board that is moving in the same direction toward actually learning what our roles are and actually researching the policies as we address items that are coming before the board. I think the public can see a change as well. It may not be a big change, but if you pay really close attention, you'll notice that there have been some changes in how we approach things. And we are listening to ourselves and, again, trying to put in practice what we put in policy.
I'll add some information about where we are in terms of some of the directives under this standard. The first one was to revise the policy manual to ensure that everything was up to date and current and adhered to all the state laws. They mentioned in the report that some of our policies hadn't been revised in many, many years. And so the policy committee over the last several months has met way more than they have in the past to try to go through all of the policies and review the policies and revise the policies that need revision and rescind the policies that no longer align with state law. So that's something that the policy committee has been working really hard on, and then the rest of the board also having to review them when they come up at the board meetings and make sure that everybody is in agreement with them. And then with regard to the way that meetings are run, we did recently, just on July 7th, we had a parliamentary training. So strictly going through and learning about how to properly conduct meetings, and then talking about the differences between the state law, our policies, and then also Robert's rules, which we do default to when it's not covered by our policies or state laws as well. So that is a training that we very recently had as a whole board.
And I'll speak to that piece, that with the conducting of the meetings, one of the first things that I did when I got the report after, of course, reading it, is that I went through and I highlighted with my lens, although it was still limited, areas of improvement for myself, areas that I could go back and look and say, you know, that I probably need to do that differently. And so the parliamentary training that we've had, I look at that for me. So one of the things that was brought up during that meeting is that, you know, it takes the team to run a smooth meeting. And there are ways in which we do things. We should do things when we're in public. But one of the things I took away also from that meeting is that for me, presiding over the meetings, is that it's a beginning. One of the things I did was reached out to a few of our board members as well to say, hey, I know I'm looking at this through my lens, but can you also give me critical feedback? Because there are some things that I need to correct. So I really believe that it's a combination when you ask Ms. Norman, how do we prevent that? I think it's a combination of training as well as a commitment to ongoing self-reflection. And the parliamentary training in my mind was a start, but there were certainly questions I had even, and I think maybe even other board members had too, even after that training. And all of our professional development meetings are public, and so that one is public. If we ever want to go back and take a look at it, just for our own continued development, but also for you all to go and take a look as well, to see more specifically like what areas were covered.
I don't know if I answered the first part of the question. I have an audience here too who's saying you didn't answer the first part of the question. So can you tell me what the first part of the question was that I missed?
First part of the question, has the board identified the first question?
Yes.
Okay. Has the board identified board members who did not adhere to the policies that you have established and adopted? And how will you hold these board members accountable? And what specific actions will the board take to prevent such violations of board policies in the future?
I really think that is going to be, from my perspective, and this is me speaking, not for the board, that's a part of our response to the Cognia report. And we haven't yet sat down and looked at the comprehensive plan for how we're going to put a lot of the directives into action. We are working on these, not piecemeal, but as they have been prioritized by our board president and our superintendent. And so as we go down this road, I think we'll be able to answer that more fully. But I think we've already talked a lot about the calling out people. I don't think that's going to be a part of our agenda to do that. I don't think that's going to bring what we need right now. But our goal is to, once we have the training, who is it that said, once you know better, do better. And so I am looking at it from the perspective of, now that we're having the training, we should know better. And though I am expecting to, I will hold people accountable, and I would expect you to hold us accountable if we don't do better.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, Dr. Daniels, before we move to the next person,
Sure.
and speak to Ms. Neely Norman, Ms. Davis mentioned, it was something you just mentioned about, the working on aspects of the Cognia report. At our August business meeting, Dr. Thomas and myself will be giving a presentation that really outlines the directives, as well as like where we are and what we're doing to address those directives and the standards. And so we hope to, I think we originally had it on our July meeting, but we ended up pushing it to the business meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. We'll move then to our next presenter, Dr. Frankie Hill. And thank you, Ms. Sheila Norman, and board members who responded.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Frankie Hill, Executive Director for Programs for Feed My Sheep, a nonprofit with the CEO being Isaiah Ellison. And we were in the most impoverished area in the entire community. I want to say I appreciate the board making this meeting a reality. But there's one thing that you said that really concerns me, and it concerns a lot of others in the community. You keep alluding to the fact that you're a fairly new board, but you haven't listened to the experience that's on the board. And when you don't listen to the experience on the board, that concerns us because you're making decisions that can last for a decade. Now, I want to talk with you all briefly tonight about standard 1.7. And 1.7 deals with Open Meeting Act. Cognia pointed that out to you 3 months ago. I went on the web, I still find the same thing, and it differs from what you've actually implemented. You stated that the Board of Education shall have standing committees of policy, finance, government relations, and property, and that the board can create special committees. The members of standing and special committees shall be Board of Education members appointed by the president. And I pulled this on just July 25. The president, from my observation meeting, did not appoint you all to the committees. And as a result, this is what Cognitive findings related to. Team members viewed a link on the Clark County School District website that identified those 4 committees. And the link stated also that the ad hoc committee from his own membership for study and fact finding. Cognitive stated that because you are a board of 9 members, that when 5 of you get together, that is an unofficial board meeting that has not been announced. Because there are 4 of you on every committee. So if the president should happen to show up as an ex officio member, you have a quorum. And Cognia advises you to do something about it. And it's been 3 months and we have not seen any changes. In fact, you have one member, Dr. Yeager, who's on all 4 committees. And how you figure this out, you've got to figure it out because they're looking at this because this is your second lowest grade. And their directive to you was to ensure that the number of board members does not present the possibility of a quorum being established during the convening of a meeting. They're suggesting that you go back and look at who's on that committee, look at their strengths, I guess, etc. But you have not done that. And that scares us because this is an area that you have to address where the accreditation is not threatened. Now, under the other finding that they have, it has to do with special interest groups in the community who perceive their function as an advisory group to you. Team members during the special review found limited evidence of the presence of advisory committees appointed by the board. However, the communication dated on September 13, 2019, submitted to Cognia by the superintendent in response to complaints that were first revealed by the community and then by him. The challenge related to governance in the Clark County School District is compounded by special interest groups. And I will point out a couple of those things that disturbed us. Why did C.J. Amerson cast the perception as director for Foundation of Excellence that she could write 6 of you requesting that you buy out the superintendent's contract? And regardless of what went down, your discussions, that is exactly what you did. And we don't need those kind of distractions. And no one checked this special interest person from getting into the Board of Education's business. And so we want to know, have you identified the special interest groups that sometimes impede your work? Have you informed groups that they do not function as advisory groups in that regard? And what actions will you take as a board to avoid future perceptions or impediments to the work of the board by special interest groups such as C.J. Amerson, such as the mayor of Winterville, and such as that group that filed that complaint against former Superintendent Means? We want to know how you're going to stop these distractions so that the vision remains on our children. Again, what actions has or will the board take to deter the special interest groups? And if I were to go back to CJ Amerson with that request to you, I think in honesty and self-reflection, it looks bad. It looks as if you did exactly what she wanted you to do, because no one advised Superintendent Means that she had a complaint, and your policy, BAB 11G, specifically states that you were supposed to tell him. And not only did you not tell him, you didn't tell Linda Davis and you didn't tell Charles Worthy. And that concerns us because that's not transparency. And I know that you're a new board and we have to move forward, but we want, now that you know better, we expect better from you so that the vision remains on our students. So again, what actions has or will the board take to deter the special interest groups from impeding the work of the board as noted in the Cognier report?
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Is that the conclusion of your questions?
Yes, it is.
Dr. Document and Ms. Davis, if you don't mind, if I at least start by taking a stab at this. One of the directives is listed is, this is on page 5, and so it's on the middle of the page for that previous standard. And it directs the board to establish a means to routinely gather, analyze, and use stakeholder perception data on the effectiveness of board members to support continuous improvement. And although I know that that is speaking directly to board members, I do think that there is something to be gained by being sure that we are gathering information from as many people or across as many diverse groups and individuals as possible. I will say that I think with as far as how do we prevent it from happening in the future, one of the things that we've done, I know you all keep hearing us referring to like our norms, and our norms aren't policies, but they support policies. So when we start talking about policy BH and code of ethics, how do we actually basically operationally define that? What does that look like in action? And so one of the things that we've done with one of our norms, and I think this may be a norm that I don't know that this has been adopted yet, Dr. Dyckman and Ms. Davis, if you could correct me. I don't think this one has been adopted, but is on communication and what we do in terms of like if we receive information, or even if there's a question from a board member, because there are a variety of different ways that we have to guard against unethical overreaching. I think any school board does, but one of the things that I think we've been trying to do is address it through norms, but then also just defer to sort of err on the side of caution now. And that means that if we receive an email, if we receive communication that another board member or the superintendent has not received, or is this just in with that person's purview, is out of our purview to forward and share that information.
I'd like to add here, I think it's very dangerous. I know that earlier we stated that the board members who were ethically challenged would not be outed, but I think when we've got special interest groups that are impacting the way that the board is run, but they're not being outed, it sets us up for the exact same thing to happen again. So I want to know. I mean, I don't know if that's a FOIL issue or not, but I do think it's imperative that we know who we as the community know who these special interest groups are, and most of the people here on this call know who some of them are. But I think it's important that we put that information out so that we can be ethically on the same page.
And if I could just piggyback on that comment and remark by Reverend Dr. Bloodsaw, I think it was James Baldwin that said something to the effect that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it's faced. And I guess we don't see how we will be able to move forward when we kind of stick our heads in the sand and say, well, we're just going to move forward, but we're not acknowledging. In this case, the Cognitive Report has specifically stated that there are special interest groups that have impeded board progress and board work. And I don't see how you are able to move forward without acknowledging that and taking whatever steps to prevent that from happening again. So I think it's essential that these groups are identified publicly, and we move forward, with that knowledge and acknowledging that there have been those groups, as has been pointed out in the Cognitive Report.
So I know we're out of time on this question, but you're kind of stepping into the world that I grew up in corporate and developing systems and things. And so when I look at this report, and I read that again today and yesterday, this is the kind of thing that you're going to have to, that we as a board are going to have to, and as a district, have to take apart piece by piece, because the report was filed anonymously, right? And so we don't have that information. No one told us. What we have is what you have. We have access to the same Facebook posts and the things that are out there in the public domain, the same articles that are in Flagpole, the same people that come and speak before the board in our open sessions. That is the level of information, I'm so sorry, that we have. And so as we prepare a response to this report, there may be some revelations there. I'm hoping there will be some revelations there, but I would not, based on being a part of this for as long as it's been going on, I can't name people specifically. I can name some people, but I cannot necessarily associate that person with a particular thing. People that were very obvious about things that they had concerns with, they came to our board, and in the public space, the same public space that the NAACP occupies, have made their feelings known. That's what we know.
Mm-hmm.
How those things are connected and who's connected to whom, that would take a little bit of work on somebody's part to pull all of that together. But again, if this is a response that you would want our board and our district to give you after some investigation, then I would ask that you make that known, and then we can table that, because I'm confident that, well, let me not be overly confident. It has not been a discussion among the board members when I was present. Let me leave it there. Thank you.
You have not addressed one thing that I wanted you to address about the Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act of Georgia said that if you discuss or take action, and if 5 of you end up there, you don't have to take an action. If you discuss it and 5 didn't appoint you, that's something you can take care of.
Right.
And I think the community wants you to address that. You don't need the same person on 4 committees.
So the way you presented that, Dr. Hill, is the first time I saw it from that lens. Honestly, when I read that, the part of the Open Meetings Act that I literally focused on was the fact that all of our committee meetings are public. And so we're never in violation of the Open Meetings Act, because we advertise them, we put the agenda out, and the public can attend. And literally, that's kind of how I locked in on that comment in the report. But now the way you presented it in terms of membership on committees, and when somebody shows up, again, because these are public meetings, there is no violation from my understanding. Our attorney's on here too. So Mike, if you want to jump in on this one, that would be helpful. But in terms of the Cognia report, we wrote a board policy back in 2018, I believe it was, that took away the board president's authority to appoint committee members. We changed that policy, and not only did we change that policy, we set term limits. And so when those two things happened within those policies, we did not, I think, take it through to the other two policies where it's mentioned that the president appoints. So that was my new information as I read the Cognia report today, with less emotion attached to it, I imagine. But that's something that we haven't addressed. And so that's why there's obviously not an answer for you, but it's something that I think that, I hope I'm not speaking out of term, but I think that's something that we can work on and get back to you with an answer.
Well, if you changed the policy in 2018, why is it still on your website that the president does appoint? I looked at this on July 25, 2020.
Right. Because we didn't take, when we changed that policy, we obviously didn't pull any other policy that talked about the president appointing people. So it's a related policy, but they didn't show up together when we were working on the first policy. Those were contentious policies, if you remember, as well. And so that was an oversight. But
well,
again,
it's in the Cognia. I'll leave it with, it's in the Cognia report that they found it also.
Yes, I agree.
So that leads me to believe, did you read the Cognia report? Did all 9 of you study it? Somebody should have caught it out of 9 people if this is inaccurate.
So
I think actually this came up, if I'm not mistaken, and Mr. Pruitt, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do relate it to what Ms. Davis has said, and Dr. Thomas, I actually think this came up in one of our norms meetings when we were talking about this specific aspect of the cognitive report and the corrections that needed to be made in board docs.
Yes, Dr. Gant. I'm not sure I can explain it any better than Ms. Davis already has, but yes, as I read this paragraph several times, and apparently there was just a misunderstanding that under Georgia law, the committee meetings themselves are subject to the Open Meetings Act. So once a committee of 4 is appointed, if 3 persons from that committee are present, that is an open meeting, and that's why they're advertised and posted just like regular board meetings. So I think Cognia, as I was reading it, it seems Cognia's concern was these committee meetings are not public, but suddenly you have a quorum of the entire board, and now they are. And that's just a misunderstanding. The committee meetings themselves are public, even if no other board members showed up.
And if I recall correctly, Dr. Gant, we have already been in the process of responding to that particular portion of the complaint in a narrative format from the board. So as the board is working on different areas of the report that came from Cognia and how actions will be taken, there was supposed to be a description or clarification provided by the board to Cognia regarding that particular directive.
Right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas, and other and to the board members who responded to the questions from Dr. Hill as well. In the interest of time, we're going to need to move to our next presenter, who is Reverend Isaiah Ellison.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate this opportunity to address the board. Good evening, everyone. My name is Isaiah Ellison. I'm the pastor of Summerhill Baptist Church in Jefferson, Georgia. I'm the founder of Feed My Sheep nonprofit, which is a center that helps the needy and the poor, food, clothing, educational assistance in East Athens.
Just lost your volume.
I lost my volume.
We can hear you now.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to address you. I want to cover other general findings by Cornelia. It is troubling that the special review team also generally observed that there's a lack of efficiency in nearly all of the meetings of the board. The code of ethics as adopted by the board is not adhered to with fidelity by most board members. Board members should also engage in training, and I know you mentioned some training that you've had, to ensure that they have knowledge and awareness of to effectively follow and support the policies they have approved, which I believe is different from the Robert's Rules of Order for business, but that's your own policies, making sure that you can carry those out and support those. My question is, what specific actions will the board take to address these concerns? And before you ask that question, let me say this, just from a business person perspective, a pastor and parent and community person. I'm not seeing the commitment and dedication from this board as it relates to the severity of the cognitive report. We're talking about downgrading the Athens-Clarke County School District, which means that if something is not done by this board very soon, that some of our kids will have degrees that will not be worth the paper they're written on. That means you got to call somebody out. You got to take some action to discipline some people. You may have to remove some folk. I heard people say you're new. Yeah, you're new. I can appreciate that. But a new board that take on the complex action of dismissing a superintendent, I don't think you're that new if you take on something as difficult as that. And so this is time for, we need some answers. Excuses are not going to get it. We need some answers quickly because time is very running out. So again, my question is, what specific actions will the board take to address these concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Is that the conclusion of your question? I'll start about what specific things that we will do to correct these actions. I do want to say it is a serious matter. I think anytime you have a third person, an objective party or organization that comes in to do an assessment, we have to take that seriously, and even more so when it's directly tied to the accreditation of the school district. And so I want to reassure you, as well as all of our guests here and our community, that this is very serious, and we're taking it seriously. As it relates to specifics, wanted to mention a couple of things. I know you mentioned the importance of calling out behavior. I do want to recognize that as a team, as Ms. Davis said, there are more of us really working to try to balance each other out. And what that may mean is someone saying, hey, Lakeisha, I think that was an overreach there, as well as inviting our interim superintendent to say that as well. And so I want to be sure to state that even if it's not done publicly, does not mean that we're not committed to holding each other accountable in an effort to correct and improve the areas that need to be improved. I will also say, I know one of the things you mentioned was removing individuals. The board does not have any power to remove an elected official. And so I think sometimes that's a misperception that's out there, but regardless of how, let's just say if I'm upset or if I think Dr. Dykeman has engaged in behavior or she thinks I've engaged in behavior that violates that, We are putting together a process, and that is what our norms address. But at the end of that, even if myself or Dr. Dykeman goes through that process, the board has no legal right to remove a board member. And so in absence of
I
that,
understand that, but we do. So we don't have names.
that's true.
What's going on, then we can't take action. So that's what I'm saying. Remove by sharing information. Who are these people that's causing these issues and problems, so that the public can deal with it?
You are correct. That is something that the public has the right to do. But I'll go back to what Ms. Davis said earlier, and that is, for the most part, you all have access to the same information that we have access to. Now, when you have access to that, you begin by referencing, I think, our meetings and observations. And so all of that information is available to the public. We experience that in real time. And so to that end, yes, the public has access to observing board meetings, to looking at the areas that we need to improve, to making interpretations about either individuals or the board as a whole and what needs to change. I will speak to one more area. You asked about the specifics. As Dr. Dykeman mentioned, in February, we engaged in a training on standards for effective governance. But currently, we also have a professional development calendar. We've set aside dates, and those include June the 18th. We also engaged in the parliamentary training in, actually, I think that was the one on June 18th. So we had the February, the June 18th. We have an August 18th training that will address policy, professional development around policy. And we have days set apart, one day set apart in September, October, and November to fill in trainings that we think we need as a board based on our self-assessment study. And so there has been a concerted effort to really prioritize professional development. I mean, I know professional development is part of it. Then the other part is adhering to the professional development. And I think that is where we really have to rely on each other. And it goes back to holding each other accountable as well. And as Ms. Davis said, inviting you all, as uncomfortable as, conversations may have been in the past between different people, or even now, this is important because it's important that we all hold each other accountable. And so there are some specific steps that are being taken to show that we take this report seriously and we take our improvements seriously, and that there's going to have to be some changes on all of our parts so that we can prioritize our children, and that we can turn our attention to fixing some of the disparities that have existed in our district.
Can I ask a question? Hello?
Sure.
Am I on?
We can hear you
now.
Okay. My question is, did I hear that you have not tried to determine who the special interests were that were referred to in the report? And as part of that, have you tried to determine whether board members were in a way involved in the secret group that filed the so-called ethic complaint? Have you not investigated that individually among all board members?
That is correct. That has not been a task of the board to investigate who was a part of the original complaint.
But the report did kind of call you out for and made reference to special interests. So again, have you not tried to determine who these groups are?
I don't think this is, I guess to answer your question directly, no. We have not as a board tried to investigate who these special interest groups are. I will say that since the report has come down, I know that Dr. Thomas has spoken with Dr. Harrison, who is the Cognia, who is now leading the Cognia, this process for Clark County, and myself and Dr. Thomas have spoken with him as well. And perhaps that may be a question that may need to be clarified, because the board has not to date examined that or investigated that. And if I'm honest, that is an important piece, but just as important is being sure that we have processes in place, such as transparency in our communication, to mitigate the impact of whoever those groups are. Because I think that, you know, there may always be special interest groups that exist.
And if I can just, I agree, we haven't done anything to that extent or to that effect. But I do believe that as we sit down together to look at the response to this report and the detailed plans that are being made to address each of the directives, that opportunity will present itself for us to ask some deeper questions. And so, and I don't want to try and color that with anything other than we have to, as this conversation started, we have to protect our children. We have to protect this district, and we have to do the things that are necessary to have Cognia simply tell us that we're moving in the right direction, and then move on to whatever our next steps are. I don't think anybody had an expectation that we would be able to address all of the things in this report, given the things that have happened in the district, along with the nation and the world, by December 30th. I think we do have to show our progress toward that and our commitment toward that. And so I'm hoping that nobody's expecting something magic to happen on that date and all of a sudden we're fixed. That's not, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm confident that it's going to take us a lot longer than we might even think to get there. But I do endorse and support the planning process to make sure that we are looking at every aspect of this report to make sure that we are the competent board that is not interfering with the district in running the school system, so that we can allow them to focus on making sure that they're making the best decisions for our children and their future.
One thing that was mentioned, I know we're out of time, but one thing that was mentioned in our last call, Dr. Thomas and myself with the Cognia person, was there was a focus on progress. And so to Ms. Davis's point, the expectation is that we would show, and he was very clear about this, that there will be progress, not perfection, but that there will be progress. So there will not be any regression. But so that when they come to do the monitoring report, that they are able to see steps being taken in the right direction.
Dr. Gant, I have made a note to speak to Dr. Harrison regarding special interest groups and to get more details on how they want us to proceed with that so that we can respond correctly.
Thank you. I was looking at the original report, Dr. Thomas, and actually I think that was a part of one of our questions, in addition to the date, as well as clarifying, I think, like the directive as far as gathering think it was gathering stakeholder data, or being sure that we are gathering a variety of different stakeholder data as well. I think it may have been on our radar, but I do thank Dr. Daniels as well as others who have brought it up, and Ms. Davis, for reaffirming the commitment to dissect every part of our cognitive report in the effort.
And can I also say very quickly here, I appreciate the understanding that progress needs to be shown, but I think we need to be given the possibility, just the remote possibility, that the accreditation of the schools could be lost, the whole entire district. I think we need to be a bit more measurable than just progress. Malcolm X said, you know, if somebody stabs you in the back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that's progress, but you still got a knife in my back. We have to, by December 30th, December 31st, whenever that due date is, we need to have some just some things that need to be ticked off long before we get to the deadline. Progress isn't progress if our children don't have diplomas that can get them jobs and that can get them into colleges and can get them financial aid.
I really think once we share the report next week at our business meeting, that what we'll be able to see is that there are many areas that we can check off. We have Dr. Thomas and her team as well. We have basically organized this whole document from the standards to directives and what area it has implications for. So if it's policy, professional development, as well as an area to assess how we're doing and what specifically we've done. And there are many areas that that I think you'll agree once seeing that we can check off. And there are still some steps to take. So I want to be honest about that. But I do think also I want you to hear that there are some areas as well that steps that we have already taken.
And once we have this meeting, Dr. Gant, are we going to make that document available to the public?
I think so.
Or some type of progress report. I don't want to get into names of people who are working on specific things because that's just a little bit too much. But to at least identify the path that we're taking to get to our objective here, I think would be valuable. And then not only will the public know that we're looking at those things, and maybe that glaring oversight that I made in the question of Open Meetings Act would catch somebody else's attention, because it's always better to have more eyes on things.
I think so. I think that could be certainly a recommendation of this committee. Of course, the board, I don't see any reason why the board wouldn't be open to publishing that information, as well as it'll be in board docs, since it'll be it'll be uploaded there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry about that, Dr.
Yes, if I could interject, I'm almost certain that I'm correct on this. I don't believe the board has any choice but to make that information available. I believe the cognitive report states emphatically that the board is to review the cognitive report and to share with stakeholders information based on their review. I believe that's in the report.
I think you're right.
If I could just make a comment. I've listening, and before this meeting this evening, I followed all of the activities of the school board and the public. And quite frankly, I'm more frustrated right now than I have been in all of that episode of events. It seems to me that Dr. Means pointed out a discrepancy in our teaching of Black children in this school district. Regardless of what the report says about the procedures, if I were a board member, I would be incensed that we have kids not being educated in this system. I have not seen the board address that problem. I think that if that came up as a problem, it should be addressed to the point that we can say that that's not true, or that it is true and this is what we're doing about it. It's more frustrating to me addressing the problems that the report has laid and not doing anything for the children than it is for us to do nothing at all. Now, we want to get involved in the activities going on with the school board, but I always listening to what you're saying. I think this has been a good meeting, but if you look at the participants, it may need to get the information, getting that information. Just some things I throw out so that you can think about them. And I'm going to shut up and listen to what everybody else has to say.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, I think in the interest of time, we really need to move to our next presenter. We want to thank you. I believe that was Asa Boynton. We want to move to the next presenters, which are retired attorney Ed Helm and Mr. Alvin Sheets.
Very well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Check one. All right. I'll be very brief in this time. I would ask, how do you plan to answer the cognitive accreditation issues now that you have officially dismissed Superintendent Means? You demonstrated that our children's education lives don't hold the weight as we had thought the answer did. It was clear that Dr. Means' plan strategy for our children and children less wealth was working. It primarily happened to be mostly Black and brown children. Bringing children grades up to speed and show significant improvement was his fault. Now, with all that, whoever you hire for the next superintendent cannot come in here and give sway to the special interest groups who orchestrated this fiasco in the first place. Second, how will you handle blatantly ignoring the Cognitive report advising you to work with Dr. Means, keeping in mind that the Cognitive report favored Dr. Means' leadership, and yet you allowed outside influences to dismiss the man with a proven plan to improve the grades of our children. As it stands, this decision very narrowly arrived along racial lines. But never mind that for now. The Cognitive report came about around April 24th. The board was supposed to share with the community board plans to correctly address the cognitive concerns. And now here we are, facing the possibility of sudden death of Clark County Schools accreditation along with the children paying the price of a majority biased board. I'm not going to harp on the lack of good judgment of one white school board representative reading the Langston Hughes poem Ku Klux at a Black church. However, it does show a certain level of insensitivity to the plight and treatment of Black Afro-Americans. I close with this quote from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "I am not bound to win, I am not bound to succeed, but I am bound to live by the light that I have. I must stand with anybody that stands for right, and stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong." And my final and third question, the final question is, are you ready for what is being created? Somebody help me breathe. That's it for me, Dr. Daniels.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheets. Also, we have retired attorney Ed Helm. Mr. Helm, are you there?
Yes. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Adrian Helm is my better half. And so I'm in disguise, on Zoom disguise here, but I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see that the school board and the leadership are doing this. I'm delighted to see Dr. Thomas vertical. I'd ask her, since she's back in action full tilt, on May 13th, 2020, I wrote to her and the school board for a school board meeting asking Dr. Thomas to have someone on her staff to help public and stakeholders to make the special report more transparent and accessible by identifying who was speaking in the examples identified in the Cognia special report on pages 3, 4, and 7. So I haven't gotten a response to that. It goes to this issue of accountability. And I think it would be helpful for those of us that are trying to follow this for that to be done. So do you think you could do that, Dr. Thomas?
Yes, sir, Mr. Helm. I'm writing this down and actually going to look at that while we're speaking.
Thank you very much. Good. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing, and I'm a little surprised that we don't have Dr. Yeager with us, who is now chair of the policy committee. And I'm going to be focusing on some of these policies and trying to find out what happens when school board members refuse to, or are unable to, or don't understand the policy and don't follow it. So a lot of this goes back to November 18th, 2019 at 6:05 a.m. when CJ Amerson, the executive director of FEE, wrote her email. And she said, basically, Dr. Means has got to go. And so that sort of generated its own energy and actions. But actually there was something before that, wasn't there? So that we're all on the same page and the public is thinking about that. Months before that, there was a group, a still secret group that hired a fancy lawyer, Patrick McKee in Newman, a well-connected lawyer, and filed a complaint saying you have to investigate the Dr. Means. It was really a poison pill. It was an attempt to destroy him and his reputation, citing he's plagiarized, he's done improper financial deals, he's done a false PhD. All these were found to be insubstantial and sort of dumped back on the school board. That was really the start of crystallizing two extreme camps. But certainly CJ Amerson put voice to one camp. I'm going to ask you, Ms. Davis, since you're experienced and I think you know about this, this wasn't the first time that CJ Amerson tried to get the superintendent fired, is it?
I was not a part of the board when that.
May I intervene? May I intervene? The
Please,
structure
thank
of
you.
this, the structure of this is for certain the listed people here to speak, and then the board will have response and dialogue. We're not going to engage in a cross-examination.
I'm not cross-examining, I'm asking questions. So thank you.
Yes, sir. So they'll all be answered at the end. They'll be addressed when you're done.
I'm taking my time, not your time, but my time to make certain statements and ask certain questions to try and get some information. So will you talk, Ms. Davis, please, about the prior instance where CJ...
Mr. Helm, are you finished with your presentation? Mr. Helm, are you finished with your presentation?
I am not finished with my presentation.
Okay, well, the structure of this is that when you're finished, then the board will respond. So you need to go ahead and finish.
Well, that's not my understanding of these procedures because there has been interaction. So I'd appreciate it if you remain silent so that I can continue.
I will not, Mr. Helm, and I will advise my client to follow the structure. And when you're finished, the board will have response and dialogue.
Well, so I hope Ms. Davis outlines that, in fact, CJ Amerson did the exact same thing for the prior superintendent, the superintendent that had been voted or decided one of the best superintendents in the country, Mr. Lanou, Phil Lanou. She wrote to the president of the the school board, Mr. Charles Worthy at that time, and said he needs to go. And I'd asked Ms. Davis to clarify what procedures he followed and why it didn't lead to the kind of conflict and controversy that it happened in this most recent time with Ms. Amerson's second attempt. So I've asked each one of the school board members that have been in favor of, that got this C.J. Amerson sort of secret letter. Ms. Davis did not, Mr. Worthy did not, but the other 6 did. Remember, Dr. Berry left. And so the answers that I've gotten when I've asked each one is the following. With Dr. Yeager, she said, no, I didn't think I really needed to follow the express provision of the school board policies, which state at BAB 11G, for people wondering what all that is, these are policies that are on the website of the school board and are the policies that are their constitution, are their ground rules, how they should follow, which expressly states, quote, board members direct all complaints and requests to the superintendent rather than attempting to solve them directly, close quote. And so when I asked Dr. Yeager, why didn't she take this request by C.J. Amerson to the superintendent as BAB 11G requires, she said, oh, that was her opinion. And then I read her the actual email, which I'd filed a records request and gotten, pointing out that the first sentence of Ms. Amerson's letter says, Dr. Berry's resignation was the stimulus I needed to send along this very painful request. And then she ends it, last sentence in her letter or email is, there is no need to respond to this email. However, I am available to discuss in person or by phone my reasons for requesting this buyout. Dr. Yeager, despite BAB 11G, responded, well, I guess we differ. So she didn't follow the express provisions. Dr. Dykeman said to me, well, there was no meeting coming up, so she didn't really think that it was relevant or she had to do anything. Dr. Knox said he was concerned that Dr. Means would see it if he forwarded this email to Dr. Means, that it was an attack on him. And because Dr. Means had already called out Dr. Knox for his behavior at a meeting and trying to micromanage or get into areas that were reserved for the superintendent, he thought he shouldn't do it. So Dr. Maddox had the following response. I talked to her first. When I tried to talk to her, she hung up on me. But then on 7/11/20, she called me back and said that I asked her
Mr.
why
Helms.
she didn't follow, pardon me?
Mr. Helms, we're past 0, and I want to be sure that we also have time for dialogue.
Yes.
Can you wrap up? I'm gonna also defer to Dr. Daniels here. I know we've gone over a bit as well in certain categories, but I do want to be sure that we have time for dialogue.
Well, Dr. Gant, you had a 10-minute clock when for President Shields and me, it should have been a 15-minute clock.
Yeah, I'm just going by what we stated. So if you want to go ahead and wrap up, feel free to maybe like synthesize what's left. I know you had gone through 3 people and reported their responses. If you can summarize briefly the others and state your questions, we will have time for dialogue.
Yeah. All right. Well, so what Dr. Maddox said was that she didn't know about the policy when she got the email. And if that was the case, she should have followed this provision BAB 11G. She apologized to me for not having followed it. I said, it's not important to apologize to me. It's important to review this policy and see whether you followed it. And if you haven't, at least apologize to the public. She got confrontational about that point, and she said, I'm finished with this. I'm not talking about it anymore. And so Greg Davis refused to understand the question. I asked him 4 or 5 times, and he never addressed it. He sort of said, well, the president of the school board gets these things and responds in a pro forma way. And then Dr. Gant, when we spoke, you said, after talking about it for 5, 6, 7 minutes, that the reason why you didn't follow this express policy and give this email to Superintendent Means was that your training was in psychology and counseling, and you'd like to keep and honor the privacy of the people that are giving you information. And so that was your explanation for it. So what is the penalty when people explicitly refuse to follow the policies? What difference does it make that you have norms if you go about doing your business in ways that allow and enable people to go in that direction? So I think I'll ask for a response by you 3, but I also want to give a shout out for the Facebook for William Breeding and Fred Smith. We care about all the students in CCSD, and that's the last is in quotes, because there's a lot of good information for people that are just trying to understand what's going on that Facebook page.
Thank you, Mr. Helms. I'll start with the end of your question, which is what good are norms? And I want to be I want to try to address this question as clear as possible. At the time, we are in the process of developing norms. And so at that point, and as has been stated earlier,
already developed.
There are ways in which policy can even be interpreted very differently. And so with the, you referenced 11, I think it was 11G, where board members direct all the complaints and requests to the superintendent. And that is actually under the general category of conduct, ethics, and relationships with the superintendent. And that overall statement says that the relationship between the board and the superintendent is a delicate one. It's essential that they have a clear and mutual understanding of their respective roles. And so that the items that you list, the specific one that you list, is in the framework of respective roles and responsibilities. And so to that end, I think people may have very well interpreted that very differently. And so when you go to 11G and it says directs all complaints and requests to the superintendent rather than attempting to solve them directly, I think it's accurate to say that there is no evidence that anyone attempted to solve anything directly. Your question is simply, why weren't this information forwarded to the superintendent? And I think as you mentioned, you've asked the individual questions, individual people, they've given you their perspectives. There are a variety of different perspectives. And one of the things that we're doing to address that is to create more norms and specific behaviors around how we go about communicating and how we go about requesting information and sharing information. And so while the policy existed, the norms did not exist. And there was no attempt to solve a problem on behalf of individual boards.
Dr. Gann, if I may, just to maybe wrap this up, up until this point, we've done a really good job, and I appreciate that from everyone of avoiding these sort of detailed he said, she said sorts of things. So I think the board is out of time, if nothing else. Board members are not going to respond to individual accusations of what they said or didn't say with certain people. That's not constructive, and that would end up taking to midnight and we'd get nothing done. So thank you for your response, Dr. Gann. I just wanted to explain that's why we're not getting into those details.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Let me go back to Dr. Daniels. I know that we were towards the end of our agenda here.
He should look tired. They don't wore out.
They don't wore her out.
Good.
And so let's see, we're at item 6 as our last item. And so I will recommend that we move forward with that item and then towards adjournment, which is on the agenda that we have.
Yeah, our next presenter is actually Mr. Fred Smith, and he is going to give an overview of the accomplishments of the Clark County School District under the leadership of Dr. Damon Means, and also pose some questions related to placing Dr. Means on leave and the separation agreement. Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much. I have a long list of accomplishments, and most of you, I have shared them with you before. So I would not go through all of them tonight, but I will read some of them. And one, talk about regarding academic progress. It says, of the 18 K-8 school, 15 increased their performance on ELA, milestone assessment. 2 remain neutral, 1 decline. Then highlights of some of those improvement. Bonnet shows increased by 12% from 2018. Howard B. Stroud, 12%. J. Harris, 8%. BHL, 8%. Okay. One of the ones that that's not listed there. Let me say this first. When Dr. Means came here, and way before he came here, African American students were neglected academically in this system. And he came here, and we were all excited because he pledged to give that some priority, and to kind of illustrate a little bit about how bad things were. Again, I won't go into a lot of details, but at 10 of Clark County or 14 elementary school, more than 80% of the African American 3 through 5th graders were not proficient in math. And at the bottom of the list at that time was Winterville, where 93, almost 94% of the African American students in those grade levels were not proficient in math. And then close to that was Barra and Gaines, where right at 90% were not proficient. So again, And these are things that we've known through the years, and I was prepared to give a little more historic perspective about this because it's rooted in racism, as Dean Daniels pointed out from the beginning. There's a deep racial component to this. You know, I guess it goes back to slavery and the history of Georgia. And although Georgia was started as a non-slave holding state, but that changed around 1750, and then around 1775, of course, the charter was written for UGA, and this area around here started to grow, and African American was brought in, where enslaved individuals was brought in to help build this country. And then we, you know, went through slavery, and then through Jim Crow, and then in 1886, public schools started in Athens. And at the time, they started out with 2 equal buildings, nice stately college-like buildings, one on Broad Street and one on Washington Street, the one on Baxter Street and Washington Street. The one on Baxter Street was for African American, but then 6 years later, they took that and then moved the African American student to some wood structure building. So it's a long history. And Dr. Means came in, put together a strong team. And if you look at the list of accomplishment, that's so impressive because again, he were committed, and he put together a strong team, and they worked hard, and achievement started to happen. And it really is disappointing in 2020 that the plug was pulled on that. And I usually point out 2 schools, that one over at Howard B. Stroud, which, as Dr. Hill alluded to, is in the most impoverished area in Clark County, but also one of the most impoverished census tract in the United States. That school led the district, at least the 3rd graders, on the milestone in reading. And that was something that we probably should have had a parade about and jump up and down. But the school board almost ignored that as if it was no big deal. And also over at Apps Road, again, a very low performing schools that, you know, pretty close to being taken over by the state, maybe yes, maybe no. Then the reading scores of the 3rd graders in that school went up 100%. So these are things that was bright lights that was beginning to happen. So the fact that that in 2020 that you pull the plug on that says a lot about who you are, but and about where we are as a community. So my question to you is, what are you going to do to continue that strong commitment that Dr. Means had brought here to do something about the education, the long neglected education of Black and brown children? And second question is, how can we trust that you really mean it since you pulled the plug? That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I am going to Ms. Davis and Dr. Dykeman, and maybe even Dr. Thomas and Mr. Gass if I start, but definitely want to invite you to jump in. I think Mr. Smith, a lot of what you shared is very important for the school board and our school district to keep in mind. A lot of the inequities that you've, as you mentioned, are historical. And they've been around forever. And so to that end, it is important to prioritize equity as well as integrate it in the things that we do. Even as a board, I do know that in one of our earlier meetings, as we talked about professional development, One of the things that has been brought up, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Davis, I think this was at least publicly brought up by you, is the importance of including in our professional development as a board areas of diversity, multiculturalism, equity, and doing that self-work. I will say as a board who is responsible for duties such as hiring the superintendent, budgeting, and policy, it is important that the board has begun to do that work as a governing body. And that is looking at who we are as cultural beings and how that impacts and shapes basically everything that we do. And so I think there is a commitment to including that work in our professional development, at least starting there. And then certainly I know Dr. Thomas, as well as Ms. Davis, can probably speak to how it has been integrated before in our strategic planning. And even now in our current strategic plan, but then we're also in a process of reviewing that, or Dr. Thomas has started that process. So I also believe that that is a second area that is very important to.
I stopped hearing you, Lakeisha.
Were you finished, Dr. Gant?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay.
I would say, and I'm in complete agreement with Mr. Smith, this being home, this is very personal for me. 29 years into the system, a parent of the system, our students learning, all of our students, and particularly our students of color, is a personal commitment of mine. And that's actually what landed me out of J.J. Harris and at the board office, was wanting to be a part of that team, moving the needle for all of our students. I have to be honest, I'm very concerned now with us having to do virtual learning about what that disproportionality will look like with our students of color, with all of our students having been out of school and us learning. And that is something that I'm really wanting our team to focus on. And someone said it, a great team was built. We've started some good work, and our goal is not to lose focus of that work. Mr. Smith, just more specifically, some of the work that we've done with principals and teachers is about having high expectations and not having an opportunity gap for our children of color, wanting to ensure that they're taught with rigor and that teachers believe in their ability. We need instruction that is culturally meaningful. We also have to really work to engage with our community. And Mr. Lawrence Harris was hired last year in that role of community engagement and strategic partnerships. And he's working very hard to reach out to different community members so that we can work together to address the needs of our students. And we really are going to need that collective partnership now more than ever, as we are in places of many of our kids not having people at home to support that academic piece like we would like to see. And what we know is going to happen is that gap is going to continue to broaden. And that's not something that our current team is satisfied with. So Mr. Harris will be working with many of you on this call to see what we can do as a community to support our students until we're able to come back to face-to-face learning. One of the areas that we started addressing 2 or 3 years ago, and that's a passion of mine, is early literacy. If we begin with early literacy, kindergarten to 3rd grade, we will help to get rid of many of those gaps that exist. If our students are able to read, they can do science, they can do social studies, they can do mathematics, they can read the word problems. And we get rid of that gap by starting early, as young as possible. So early literacy is a huge focus for us for this school year. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting our kids back, because we need teachers working with our students to help teach those early literacy skills. If you're not a reading teacher, it's hard to teach that at home. And we recognize that. So we are going to be reaching out to partners. Mr. Gaskins, is there anything I've omitted that you would like to add?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I just wanted to also add our public commitment to our teachers and their professional learning. So we have spent a lot of time this summer, as well as a year-long professional learning plan for our teachers. We want our teachers to be able to reach all students. We do have students that come to school that are 2 or more years behind academically, and we just want to make sure that we're building the capacity of our teachers to serve those students so we can close those gaps as quickly as possible. Dr. Thomas, I will add our structuring around ensuring that our students are career and college ready. We are moving from the notion that graduation is the destination, but more that when our students do graduate, which is an expectation of all of our students, that they can go off to college and be successful or have a career that can support them to be independent or support their families. And then the other thing that I wanted to add, Dr. Thomas, is that we, with the support of the board, have spent appropriately millions of dollars to adopt our math curriculum as well as our ELA curriculum at the middle school level. We have not had an official adoption of math materials at all 3 levels, as well as having a core ELA curriculum at our middle school. And we have been able to do that. And we feel that that will support our students moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines.
I know we're getting close to the end, but I guess I'm probably the second oldest member of the veteran member on the board, but we have been working and pushing to get to where Dr. Means took us fairly quickly with the groundwork that was led in our academic pursuit. So I am grateful for that. I'm grateful for this team that we have now in administration. And Dr. Thomas, I just cannot thank you enough for what you're doing for us and how you're leading us. As a board member, I have from the beginning been focused on what is it that we absolutely must do to ensure that all of our children are leading. And a simple question was, what does it cost to educate a single child in Clark County? And people want to take that number of the budget and divide it by the number of kids. That is not the answer that we're looking for. We're looking for the answer that says every single child succeeds, right? And that's going to get a different level for people. This board has a framework for doing that. We have strategies for doing that. Those strategies have to be adjusted from time to time, but the focus for this school system is still the same as it was 5-6 years ago. And so we have simply allowed every superintendent that we've had since to put his own spin on how he does that. But what this board absolutely needs to continue to do is hold the district not only accountable, but also for pushing that transparency forward. And we started this whole conversation about a dashboard with Dr. Means. We tried it with Dr. Lanu, it didn't get very far, but with Dr. Means, he really pursued that. And that dashboard was going to give the public a view into everything that was happening at every school on all of the things that we measure. We're not trying to keep secrets here about how schools are performing, how many people are at that school, and all the programs that are there. But if we're going to ever address the inequity in our school system, then we have to build systems to support that, to be able to tell us what's happening. And so I'm hoping that as we move forward, the job of holding us accountable won't be so difficult. You'll be able to simply go to our dashboard, you'll get to see what's happening, and then you can make evaluations and judgments. But let me encourage this, the NAACP and all of the people that are on this call to continue watching us, continue giving us suggestions. Everybody's ideas is valued. We may not be able to implement any of them or all of them, and it's not necessarily our job, but it is important that we hear from you so that we know where to focus the attention on things that we don't see, because 10 people are not going to see everything that's happening in Clark County. But we should have more information than you have as it relates to what we're doing. And so we should be able to share that information more openly. Thank you.
I guess in closing, the question is, why was Dr. Means put on leave, and why was he bought out? Since the schools were making progress, even Cornelia acknowledged that, and there's a lot of data to support that as well. So again, probably a rhetorical question. Why was Dr. Means put on leave for 6 or 7 months? And finally, why was he bought out? And for the first time, we were beginning to see some academic growth in this community.
And as we close, I might say, Dr. Gant, thank you for your energy and standing when you could have voted another way. Stay strong. And we appreciate your energy and the leadership you're trying to display in this tough environment.
Thank you, Mr. Sheets. Mr. Smith, I did hear your question and do recognize that it is probably more of a rhetorical question that, you know, can't, you know, there are things, as I shared with Dr. Daniels and Mr. Sheets, as we've been trying to put this process together, that there are, you know, things that we would be able to address, and certainly things that we aren't able to address publicly. And so I do hear your question, and I do recognize it as a more of a rhetorical question. And also, you know, if there's any additional, I guess, information that Mr. Pruitt would like to add, but I think all of us have seen the public information that exists regarding Dr. Means, that the situation with him being placed on leave and the mutual.
Yes, Dr. Gant, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the sincerity and the respectfulness with which Mr. Smith poses the question. And I'm sorry to just say that you know, the district, having resolved its differences with Dr. Means amicably, it just isn't legally or practically wise to rehash either individual board members' criticisms of him or his criticisms of individual board members. Again, I appreciate the question and apologize we cannot be more responsive.
Mr. Smith, I think that was at the end of your questions, and I think I heard Mr. Sheets as well. I don't see Dr. Daniels. I think we're towards the end. Our agenda is not up in front of me anymore, but I think we're at adjournment or final remarks, if I'm not mistaken.
We actually, yes, we have remarks and a brief presentation by Reverend Dr. Bloodsaw, and I believe you're also going to make some closing remarks.
Yeah.
And I believe Dr. Bloodsaw will follow you. I believe that's the agenda.
Thank you for putting that back up. I'll go ahead and I don't think I need 5 minutes, but I will say thank you on behalf of the committee as well as the district. I know Mr. Sheets, you reached out a while ago, and this has sort of been, it's been a while trying to get this together, but I want to reiterate the importance of these conversations. At the very beginning, someone stated that you know, the importance or coming in unity, love, and peace is not necessarily, you know, what we tend to think of it as, but it's the presence of justice. And so I look at these conversations as necessary. They may not always be comfortable, but I hope that from this conversation begins dialogue. And that we're able to continue dialogue, even if it's individually or what have you. But I am appreciative for the space. I'm appreciative for everyone that has shared concerns, presented, and asked necessary questions. We're elected officials, and that's what happens when you're elected officials. You know, we're all held accountable, and I do believe that all of us on this call and the two entities between the Clark County School District, the school board, as well as the NAACP and our larger community, we have our children's interests at heart. And so figuring out how do we get there and how do we close those gaps that have been persistent since really the integration of school is critical. And so I do thank you for the time. I thank you for sharing your questions. I thank you for being here. I think at one point I noted 76 people on the call. And so thank you for helping create this space. I'll turn it over to Dr. Bloodsaw, and then I will adjourn.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much to all of the members of the board, especially Dr. Thomas. So good to see you up now, and just know that Ebenezer has had you in our prayers. Dr. Dykeman, Dr. Davis, Dr. Gant, and Attorney Pruitt. Thank you so much. Everybody on the call tonight knows and understands the depth and breadth of why this matter is so pressing to us. Our children and their futures hang in the balance. The great difference, I believe, is what must be done in order to right a wayward ship. There's no way to pretty up the Cognito report. We can't ameliorate it. We can't make it favorable. It's damning on almost every level. The task before the board and our community is to fix what has gone so terribly wrong. We can fix it now so that we can put this behind us and deal with the other myriad issues that plague not just the Clark County School District, but the entire state and beyond. We have children who are forced with having to go to school virtually, and some of them have little to no access to either the internet or electronic assets needed. And here we are dealing with an issue of accreditation that may render all of it moot. As was said earlier, if they receive a diploma that's not worth the paper it's printed on. This is not a 2020 issue. It's a generational misstep that has the power to create what Dr. Thomas mentioned earlier as an opportunity gap in the lives and the hearts and the minds of our children. Somewhere along the way, the business of the Clark County School District got lost amidst personal issues of likes and dislikes. The board, the district conducted a search for a superintendent, and a superintendent was selected. But somehow the board deleted at great expense to our children the progress that board has set in motion. And in the process, the community's voice has been completely voided and muted. I appreciate the idea that has been expressed towards the end of the call, that the dialogue that has begun is one that needs to continue. Specifically because 49% of the district belongs to the African American community. The first step to bridging the communication gap is through an immediate meeting between the board and the Black and Brown community, which again represents 74% of the school population, in order for us to discuss the accreditation crisis and the proposed changes. The Clark County Board, a branch of the NAACP, has repeatedly reached out, as well as the churches, and yet, prior to this meeting, no responses. Yet time continues to tick away. Shirley Chisholm reminded us, and we should all be mindful of that, of this in this situation. If you don't have a seat at the table, you might be what's for dinner. Our community and our children have been what's for dinner for too long. It's time for us to have a seat at the table. The imminent threat and the impact of the loss of accreditation to the future livelihood of our children should not be lost on any of us. One thing is for sure, if we don't fix this now in the lives of our children, we will have to deal with it later. By and large, the children that we're talking about tonight, they don't belong to families who can afford to send their children to private schools. Most of those who could have already have. A loss of accreditation will haunt this community, this district, and might I also add the lives and the resumes of those who are on the board. Any and every opportunity henceforth for a greater opportunity, a different opportunity for you, it presents the opportunity for this skeleton to be brought up. Answers to questions have to come. In closing, I'd be remiss if I didn't include one simple truth. Out of every bad situation, there's the potential for great positive results. Swallowing pride and putting the children back in first position, which got monumentally more difficult with the departure of Dr. Means. Yet out of what the great mystic Howard Thurman said, or he called it a luminous darkness, stands a grand opportunity for us to turn this cognitive report into a landmark moment in the history of the Clark County School District when the doors were locked to outside influence and the difficult work of reconstructing the district brick by brick with our children's best interests held at heart. Now's the time for us to lock arms and together make this episode not one to forget, but one to remember, because it marks when we decided to march together and not against one another. God bless you. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Bloodsaw. Thank you, Mr. Sheets, and thank you, Dr. Daniels. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, as well as Mr. Gaskin, Ms. Palmer, again, all of our speakers, Ms. Davis, Dr. Dykeman, and everyone who has been a part of tonight, Mr. Pruitt, and all of our speakers. I am going to move forward with adjournment. Dr. Daniels, that's all that I have on our agenda. And I will move forward with adjournment and refer to the committee and open the floor for a motion. Ms. Davis, I'm sorry, were you saying something?
Yes, I move that we adjourn.
Okay, can I get a second? Okay, thank you, Dr. Dykeman, for the second. I don't know any objections, so we are adjourned at 8:22. Thank you very much for joining us and have a good evening.